again, welcoming everybody to this the State of Cyber session. And I think our speakers are wonderful. I would like to now turn it over to Tracy and Bartos to give us their program. Thank you.
Tracy, unmute.
No. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see you, quote unquote. Bartos and I really enjoyed working together to put this together, and many of you could give this brief. Some of you are just awesome. A lot of you are experienced, and we really want this to be interactive. We've got a few discussion points today, and then we would like to eventually turn cameras back on and unmute and hear some ideas from you. So I'll kick us off today. First, I want to thank Dan Bell for your leadership, pulling these sessions together every month, continuing to get us together. I always learn something. I appreciate it. I still get to meet other people, even though it's online. And I greatly appreciate the time and effort that you put into this, and every event you're associated with is well organized. So thank you, Dan. I really enjoyed preparing for this with Bartos. It got me thinking about additional improvements we need to continually make in our company. Cannot take the eye off the ball because the bad guys aren't taking the eye off the ball either. So anyway, our agenda, I'm going to give a quick state of cybersecurity. All right. And talk about the threats, and then really want to hear some of the feedback, some, what's come up, especially with the pandemic with you, anything you've tried, and then where are we going next? As we prepared for this, we laughed about, it's almost a hopeless situation. I mean, it's constant. It takes constant care and feeding to protect our companies, layers and layers of security. In general, we all have anxiety about it sometimes, and whoever they are out there, they always have the advantage, as Bartos reminded me, because they have the element of surprise. And I think really just trying to protect ourselves against that element of surprise is the best thing we can do, for our companies. So what is the state of it? This is from the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center and their annual report. And they received, I couldn't believe it, it's bolded for you, 467,000 complaints. And not everything's even listed. Some people don't even bother to call. And 3.5 billion in losses to individuals and business victims. I know that would, any loss of revenue or money, from any company, even ours, would be detrimental. So I feel for those people that did have to endure that. The number one way in is still business email compromise. Your most loyal employee, is the one sometimes it falls prey to those business emails and compromises. And then of course we got phishing, non-payment, non-delivery, extortion, and personal data breach. So we're all familiar with those, but it's nice to see it all encapsulated in one report. And then the next slide, you want to change that Bartos? It didn't change for me. Okay. The next slide, I just pulled this out of that same report just to look at Virginia for business email compromise, $53 million last year. So these scams involve criminal spoofing, mimicking a legitimate email. That's the number one way. And our employees are falling for it. Virginia ranks 7th in the country with most reported victims and 9th for total loss by victims. So, you think about what companies are headquartered in our state, and also, a lot of government work that's being done, by our company. So we're not doing too good right now as a state in many of these categories. And if you're not familiar with it, the state has initiated the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative, something you might want to look up, and that's where the state is actually investing into our universities to make sure that the things that we need as businesses are being taught in those programs. And there's internship for kids and really building our workforce. So, because we are weak in a lot of areas. As far as the next slide, top reported vulnerabilities. It's unpatching, which we've all heard from. We make it so easy for the criminals. We published that National Vulnerability Database. I mean, we suck information in from those databases, even for the systems we use and try to protect. And they're all publicly known. So the bad guys know where our holes are. So if we aren't patching on a regular basis, they can come right in. And then the ransomware attacks, continue to be up in 2020. Recently there's a new FBI agent. He's been in our area about a year, Agent Aaron Pinder. He just took over the cyber squad in our area. And I heard him speak 2 weeks ago. He said the ransomware is rampant in our area, just in Hampton Roads. And it's a distraction for them. They can't focus on other things because of all the ransomware that's occurring and investigations that have to occur. What are we doing? We continue to beef up our training, for our employees. What does it look like? What do I do if I get a ransomware? Those are things that we have to continue to work on. All right, next one. Slide. I just want to touch on real quickly the federal agencies. What are they seeing? The government agencies, where so much is invested in cybersecurity protection. They've got, unlimited resources. This includes all critical infrastructure, energy, transportation systems, communications, financial services, and over 28,000 cyber security incidents were reported just last year on our government systems. And more and more personal information is stored on those systems and being exploited every day. In the next slide, there's a GAO report. We're not going to go into detail of this. You guys, can read that on your own. But they actually looked at how to protect our infrastructure. They did a deep dive, worked with a lot of experts, developed a full report. And it may be something you want to take a look at as a reference for the planning that you also need to do to address cybersecurity challenges that you're facing. All right, next I'm going to turn it over to Bartosz to talk about some of our adversaries and who it is.
Well, Tracy, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you for your leadership and putting this webinar together. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Mm-hmm. Before I continue, let me kind of give you a bit of perspective around what we do, because that context is important in this whole conversation. So after major events, cyber events, hacks, breaches, we often come to large corporations next to investigation teams that go and investigate the reason for the breach, the vulnerabilities, the gaps and everything. And we meet with the board of directors of companies behind the closed doors, where basically we hear stories of anxiety behind what went wrong, not on the technical side, but business, operations, risk element. How can we improve? How do we make sure that whatever we do as a business, we are not 15, 20, half an hour away from basically being out of business if we have a major industry event and hacks. So we work across many market verticals: technology, software, services, goods and services, manufacturing. We often go to the companies with revenues of 100 million to largest we've been to, it was $20 billion. And behind the closed door, we really have a conversation how to change the mindset around cybersecurity, because obviously what we do doesn't work. The first observation, based on the last major events, SolarWinds, Maersk, a couple others, is that we are truly in the era of nation state cyber espionage and crime, regardless of the size of the company. which means we see a lot of nation state actors, Russians, North Korean, Iranians, and a couple other places that either for the political influence, dollar value, or something else, they will do anything to infiltrate basically this nation at every possible level, going all the way to hardware, software code, supply chain, social engineering, to basically take an advantage intellectually or in any other form. And no one today is safe, regardless how much money we spend in cybersecurity. Basically our state of what I call a safety, cyber safety is not there. So that's a huge conversation at the board level, because that requires a major moving forward collaboration between corporations and governments at different levels to truly ensure that any business is treated as a critical infrastructure, critical performance business in the culture of what we do. So that's a big element. Also, what we are discovering in the conversations with our parties, that yes, we all know about phishing, social engineering, malware, ransomware, data breach, inside attackers, but we see a tremendous increase in espionage around supply chain. And I'm not talking supply chain espionage, cybersecurity breaches at the tier 1 companies, enterprise. But we have one customer where they have a 6,000 suppliers all the way down to tier 5, which tier 5 is a family-owned business, $5 million in revenue, small EBITDA, no staff, not IT staff, not even very basic cybersecurity capability, most of the services in the cloud. And then we have, the firewall that someone went and bought from Best Buy and installed in the business, and that's where the supply chain espionage starts, with very unaware, very unequipped type of businesses going all the way through the back door to enterprise level companies. Very common, big problem. So of course, the conversation with the companies is how far and how do we protect our supply chain across critical infrastructure, going all the way to the last, what I call a nuts and bolts of providers for our technologies. The problem is with the supply chain conversation, one of the things that we're often engaged is in, especially for businesses, companies, cybersecurity business companies that come to US market, we are involved in assessing readiness or product capability or product availability to truly, span across supply chain protection. And we are discovering that there's a lot of great companies that have a very well-defined marketing pitch and general value story, but they truly don't understand the criticality of supply chain protection. And if those companies come to US, either organically or inorganically through larger players, I'm not going to mention names, just not to advertise here, or through the standalone business, there's a lot of gaps that comes with those technology services and practices. So supply chain as attack, the nation state actors is a huge element that is only going to increase in the frequency and duration. And often when we sit with CEOs, COOs, CISOs, CIOs, chief revenue risk officers at the board level, we hear basically the same story. And the same story that comes very apparent is that the information security is truly an asymmetric warfare between the hackers and the victims. What it means, it doesn't matter how much we invest, CapEx, OpEx, outsourced services, managed services, cloud. It doesn't matter how much we outsource, we are always on the losing end. We are always behind, which means it's really not a question about, how do we prevent event, but how quickly we get aware of the events to within 15, 20, half an hour, maybe even sooner, eliminate the potential threat that can basically put the entire business at the risk of non-existence. So the asymmetric warfare is a real reality today at the corporate level. Second element is your business is either hacked or will be hacked. This is an interesting conversation at the board level because historically there was an element of arrogance and denial by some corporations that something like this is not going to happen to us. We are not a potential target, or there is nothing potentially that someone can steal from us, but it's not really about stealing. It's about, again, nation state espionage to derail, to destabilize economic performance at the different market sectors. So the changing a mindset of the board that yes, being hacked, it's something real, and we have to be proactively prepared in case and when things happen. Big element that unfortunately doesn't favor cybersecurity conversation.
Total revenues had fallen by 76%. So when we look at annual.
Another element that also doesn't favor us is COVID. COVID pushed and is pushing a lot of companies to reduce their operational expenditure spending and move a lot of critical infrastructure, critical elements into cloud. And the reality is that cloud is not more secure than everything else we have in the house. It's actually more vulnerable to many elements of cyber warfare. So there is this very big dilemma at the board level between a very pragmatic, skillful CIO, CISOs who know what it takes to protect the business. On the other hand, a business, what I call a sovereignty check, how we reduce the spending and lack of balance between how we spend, where we spend, and necessity to move to cloud. And regardless if we are increasing spending and resource allocation, the problem we still face today, and it's funny because even SolarWinds hack didn't change some elements how we think about cybersecurity. Still, many current solutions are a la carte, fragmented, ineffective, not as a standalone, a point solution, but as a well vertically integrated across supply chain. So those are just some of the listed, elements that we hear and we have conversations at the board level. And common questions at any given time at the board level is, regardless how much we spend, regardless how much we allocate, regardless how we try to balance a risk element of the business,
unemployment rate.
The question is really, how do we go ahead from this point? What is the future? How we get ahead of the situation that despite what we do, despite how much we spend money, we simply cannot, for some reason, get ahead of the problem statement. And the problem statement is not to eliminate potential cyber hack, but how do we get better in speed of detection, of very rapid elimination of the problem statement? And how do we make sure that the entire organization, and the bigger the organization, the bigger the problem statement is, around making sure that when we have a situation of espionage, cybersecurity espionage, we know what are the processes, communication, and governance, that the entire organization acts as a single unit to prevent what is happening as we speak. So again, this is some of the perspective, ladies and gentlemen, from some of the conversation. And like Tracy mentioned, we would love to kind of open the floor for the conversation and kind of get your perspective. We are all in the same boat. It doesn't matter, ladies and gentlemen, what we do, how we do, we are all in the same boat of cybersecurity vulnerability, and that is only increasing in frequency and duration. So we would love to kind of understand your feedback and perspective of how do you believe we should move as individually, as businesses, as collectively in industry, to really start get ahead of the game here. So I would love to, Tracy and I would love to open the floor for kind of initial feedback, and we'll take it from here.
Rick Severinghausen, I think you had a good question. Why don't you tee it up?
Hey, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Hey, listen, this is a large scale question. Most of you know, I spent 20 odd years driving nuclear submarines around the ocean, doing some of the sneaky Pete kind of operations, and learned something about cybersecurity. That's about 30 years ago, so I'm out of date. But I watch the news and I read what's going on. And what I think is that we're in a war with China, Russia, and the other ones that you had in your earlier slide. And I don't think the US is treating it as such. And so I wonder what you might have to say about this. And the reason I ask is I believe that we need an equivalent of either a digital quarantine or a digital blockade capability. And that's a national government issue, not a company issue. And so that's just me pontificating. but I'd really like to know if there's any notion of cybersecurity companies such as yours getting together and forming some kind of a coalition to say, hey, government, national government, you really need to do this because we can only do so much as individual businesses, individual companies, and individual cyber operators doing different functions on a business scale, not national scale. That's my question.
Sir, extremely good feedback, very relevant feedback, and let me give you, and I'll be I'll be very careful how I respond to this question. 100% agree with you. It's time to put, and I think unfortunately for a while in this country we had too many politics around cybersecurity and simply protecting our own and how we protect our own. And this was purely a politics played, against China, against Russia, against Iran, and couples, North Korea and a couple other places. I think we're in the point, specifically after SolarWinds events, we're at the point where there is a common will, and there is actually a lot of activities right now between commerce, enterprise side of the business, as well as government, to saying, okay, enough is enough. It's time to really join the forces and try to figure out how we protect primarily critical infrastructure to make sure that, again, the events will be happening, but how do we get ahead of not only detecting and being preventative, but also how we respond in kind to some events that are happening. So it is happening. It's slower than I would like to, because again, the amount of breaches and the amount of events that we handle is more than the amounts of conversation we have how to handle this. But I agree with you, and there are some activities in this space. We're working with a lot of retired 4-star generals who are basically also trying to help us reinforce this at the government level, how to really, this becomes a national state situation rather than political individual response type objectives.
Yeah, I'll address it from Department of Defense. Many of you are defense contractors or work in the industry on this call also, and they are attempting to set up the cyber maturity model certification. They're using the NIST 800-171 as a benchmark and some additional requirements. They've been working on this for several years, and now it's going to take 5 to 6 more years to roll it out. Because what happened is we have all that classified information, at the Pentagon, our national security, and then they divvied it all up to all of us contractors. And some of it's unclassified or controlled defense information, as they say. And they are, and they've allowed us to self-attest that we've met all these requirements. And they're finding that not everyone's, some people are misinterpreting the requirements or aren't able to meet all the requirements. Or as Bartosz says, some of them are like, no one would want what I have. So they're choosing not to implement some things. So they are rolling that out. They've selected several contracts that they will start auditing, but it's going to take another 5 to 6 years. They're not paying us to do it. That was a good suggestion you had. It's going to drive up our cost of doing business. But it is good to see that they are at least saying, here's a benchmark, here's a standard you have to meet to do business with the Department of Defense. So, and then the other, transportation, energy, they're talking about it. And then a lot of us are in the maritime industry around here, and the International Maritime Organization has given guidelines very similar, but it's up to you to determine whether you want to follow those guidelines. But those will become requirements over time. So it's good practice for businesses to familiarize themselves with the requirements and start checking them off. Just like HIPAA requires, healthcare industry to meet certain requirements. PCI for the credit card industry. So DoD is finally getting their, requirements documented, and then you'll be audited. And same with the maritime industry, but they're a few years out. So a lot of vulnerabilities there right now.
Well, thanks. Seems reasonably encouraging, so I guess I can hold off on Getting one of those Chinese language courses? Thanks.
Yeah.
No, can I, and I know you may not like my answer
Mhm.
here. Post events, post-modern analysis, when we meet with the companies, we
Mhm.
discover that all the guidelines, certifications,
Mhm.
frameworks are irrelevant.
Mhm.
They create a false perception of readiness.
Mhm.
We spend a lot of money to prepare, and we discovered that that false perception often gives enough kind of confidence to the board or management that they say, okay, we are. It's almost like we're protected in the sense of we have the necessary tools and guidelines in place. And unfortunately, it's a false perception that I cannot tell you how many times it's simply a false perception. You may anyone on this call can disagree with me, but that's our observation, ladies and gentlemen.
Mhm.
That was actually going to be one of my questions, guys. And my name is Tihomir Christov. I'm with Old Dominion University. The CIS top 20 controls is something that we all try to follow and try to at least cover that starting point for every organization across the board out there. One is, I guess, from a control perspective, from a framework perspective, Bartosz and Tracy, what are you guys recommending? Folks that actually adopt. Is CIS 20 enough? Which I don't think it is. But if not, then where do we start with?
That is the question every single CEO asks us post events, because they all have invested time and effort in some frameworks. And yet, not the fact that the event happens, but the intensity of the event is not properly handled by the business. And we don't recommend, and if now I would say something, you may guys scream and yell at me because I have experts on the call here. We don't recommend any frameworks. We spend more time educating people around governance of communication. If the event happens, how do you respond within 5, 10, 15 minutes? Social engineering, supply chain, how you create a silo, communication silo in the business where not everything has to be connected to internet. It is okay to isolate certain elements by the virtue of network and people process technology. It may create more hassle, but again, it's a practical steps, because at the end of the day, it's a human factor or human social engineering that impacts the kind of first step. Okay, so we don't, in our recommendations, there's never a framework recommended because it doesn't work.
Well, we do have one.
I know.
We feel like you have to start somewhere and make progress and at least educate. We are contractually required to follow the NIST 800-171. And over the years, we've learned that's a very good starting place. It addresses physical security, account access. Most of it's common sense. Most of it's things we're doing, but there are areas we can tighten up, that help protect it. So at least it gives you a framework. A lot of people use it. And, there's a lot of guidance out there. I presented with Dan Bowden. I think he's on. I know they're using that NIST 800-171 as at least it gets you going in the right direction. And there's governance and policies, because starting from scratch is very, very difficult. So Dan, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's hard to digest some of the frameworks as large as they are. And what we looked at was what was the most meaningful in terms of hitting the most pointed compliance requirements we had. So some of our government contracts, the Office of Inspector General referred to NIST 800-171, which if you look at it, it's really a derivative of the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so we write policy and standards. And then within those policy and standards, if someone wants to come back and see, well, what's the control to validate if you're adhering, we refer back. And so we use NIST 800-171 for our broad-based security program. And then we also, depending on contractual obligations or others, will refer to maybe some some more discrete control sets out of other NIST frameworks, out of PCI DSS, et cetera.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Paul Dockery. First off, Dan, thank you for putting this together, and hopefully you still look great, even though your voice is a little bit sketchy there. Bartosz, and forgive me if I pronounced that wrong. I want to say that I think the fact that you jumped out there and said that those NIST and CMMC controls and requirements are kind of fluff, and I would agree. I would also point out that, to Tracy, to your point, we're starting to see those come down in government contracts, right? We're starting to see them write in certain, and the flow down requirement from a prime to a sub, making sure that they have to be level 1 or they have to be level 2. And I have a little bit of heartburn with that, because I think a lot of the controls, you can write deviations in your individual practice that allows you to kind of circumvent the control in general. I mean, I think one of them, like passwords, or we want 12 characters, unique numbers, can't repeat the last 4, but you can write a deviation to your policy that says we only want 10. Okay, well, that kind of defeats the whole purpose. One of the things that I think when you look at your presentation and user training is one that's a critical component to all of this, is having those parties, and I think a lot of the folks on those calls are executives or fairly high up in the director level within their industries. And I think we're probably the worst at it, right? We get the email and we click it and we go forward with it. And I think those are the kinds of remediations, or that proactive approach to the whole cyber circumstance, that are worth investing in and worth talking about. It's not perfect by any means, but it is something that we do try to implement and try to put those controls in place. So, but thank you again for the presentation. I thought it was very good.
Paul, very good point. And one of the dilemma we see with deploying controls and frameworks, as you go outside of the core business through the supply chain, that the farther you go away, the more expensive it becomes for the company, especially smaller companies. Plus, they don't have a capability, know-how, experience, not to even deploy, but to manage this on the proper basis. They don't even know if cybersecurity is a 1 word or 2 words. Okay, how you spell it. So the question becomes, and we had a situation with company. It's a $25 billion company, 6,000 suppliers, and we have discovered that they had on the payment breach, because one of their family-owned business, 5 million family-owned business, they had some control, like you said, they had the selective control, Paul, what you described. Someone simply put, password 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's it. It's past game over. Okay, at that point. So,
does anybody have examples of how to improve your response times and how to react fast? I mean, tabletop exercises, that sort of thing. Has anybody done something that's been really beneficial for your company?
This is Chuck from the city of Chesapeake. One of the tools we use is an endpoint protection tool that has allowed, one of its features is as soon as it starts seeing encryption or whatnot, it basically will start pausing and start saving those files off to space on the server, in essence, and then validate through the individual or through our security managers that, yes, this is an intended practice of, hey, yeah, I do want to encrypt these files. So from that standpoint, that helps us with the ransomware side of the house. Some of the other things that we do, I'm not sure how others feel about this, but we watch our traffic that goes out probably more so than our traffic that comes in, because that gives us an opportunity to determine if we have bad actors, because being a local municipality, we don't see a lot of activity overseas. We deal very little with any overseas entities. So if we start seeing traffic going anywhere outside the US, then to be honest, pretty much anything anywhere out of Virginia, we start kind of questioning. So that's another thing, just in general, you should know your business. Obviously, it's harder for multinationals to kind of dictate what they should or shouldn't see, but at the same time, they're like Bartos was mentioning, your bad actors. Very, very unlikely any of us deal with North Korea. Very unlikely that any of us deal with Iran. So if you see anything going or coming from Iran or North Korea, probably safe bet it's not anything you want to deal with. Now, nation states, they get around that because obviously they hack in and they get into the little mom and pop place like Paul had mentioned, where they circumvent the security and then it looks like it's coming from their entity. But at the same time, you should know if you have some sort of account going to or from that particular company. We are trying to get to the point to where we can delineate, and we have done this on some of our executives already, delineate where, when, and why they would log in from different areas. And we lock it down to those specific individuals to where I know this person's going to be in the office from 9 to 5 every day, and they never log in from home. So we basically lock it down to, we've got these 2 or 3 MAC addresses that we know this individual will use to log into the city. Therefore, these are the only valid accesses. And we work with those individuals and tell them, hey, if you're traveling or if you're doing something else, you need to let us know so that we can open up your access and give you, either your telephone so we can put you on a VPN via your telephone because we have a MAC address at that point, or some other means of security to where we could still let them log in and get done what they need to get done. So those are types of things we do to kind of be as proactive as possible.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
It's Martin and Joseph. Hey, Dan, first of all, man, I hope your throat gets better. And I want to thank you for your leadership in putting these together monthly. Bartos and Tracy, you guys did a phenomenal job presenting today. So thank you very much for that. I wanted to go back to the comment about, what framework do you adopt? I think as general business, I mean, we're all talking 800, 171 NIST. Naturally, DOD is very big part of our region with all the defense contractors here. But you know what? There's a lot of general businesses out there that truly do need some type of protection. Just the most basic NIST framework, like the general business, I believe it's 800-62, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
But these basic, frameworks are good for any business. And in fact, we are encouraging all of our business clients that we manage to adopt, this framework and let us put some tools and safeguards in place to protect them. I think that, the thought that business owners are just trying to save money is kind of foolish. I mean, they need to be really proactive in putting these frameworks in place and just being a good citizen to to the business community and their vendors, because it is a supply chain issue. We're seeing lots of exploits that are happening, and it's often users that are being taken advantage of. Man-in-the-middle attacks. Clearly you guys have identified a lot of ransomware attacks, but we're seeing more and more man-in-the-middle attacks, and they're pretty sophisticated. And there's a lot of people that are being duped out there. So anyway, I would just encourage all of you, to continue to try to promote, businesses adopting a framework that they can, implement and make sure that they're protecting themselves.
Martin, this is a great point, and I think we still suffer from the idea and mindset by many smaller businesses that cyber attacks or cyber something will happen to the bigger organizations. I'm kind of immune to this kind of things. It's a truly educational and awareness situation, letting people know, listen, we're all in the same boat. And the reality is usually people who invest billions of dollars in cybersecurity, yeah, the sophisticated hackers, they'll go from the bottom up. Okay,
Yep.
it's easier.
Absolutely.
It's easier.
Well, we tell people that, these bad actors are fishing with nets. They're not fishing with single fishing poles, right?
Yeah.
So they're looking for any kind of exploit and to see, what's in the net. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with you.
And Martin, maybe a comment. They're fishing with both. I mean, they are fishing, nets, fishing poles, anything.
So one of the things, ladies and gentlemen, one of the interesting practice we're discovering along all the big events that usually, historically, you had, nation state actors. They only went for a big strategic, important, and then you have all the other hackers who can, if they can get to some, malware or some kind of, couple million here and there, that'll be good. We're actually noticing that a lot of nation state actors actually often go now as an opening door, and they allow the crowd basically come and kind of, plunder the land over here. So it's a much more sophisticated approach. So yeah, it's a pole, it's a net, call it whatever. It's just, it amazes me how hackers are evolving, even in the mindset, how they are approaching and how they kind of, play a tag team along themselves to get to the point of something.
Yeah, Martin, thanks. You're kind of coming at it from a managed service provider, IT support view. And then I think Matthew wanted to give an update just on the cyber piece,
Sure,
what
thank you,
you're
Tracy.
seeing out there, just in Hampton Roads. So
Yeah, some of the areas that that we've been seeing really comes down to implementation of multi-factor authentication, for example. Just MFAs not being implemented properly across an organization. So, yes, we're referring to the NIST 800-171 criteria, but just MFA in general is something that all organizations should be looking at, especially as we're trying to protect our sensitive and proprietary information. There's a lack of documentation of our existing practices. That's a big issue that a lot of organizations are facing right now. So Bartosz, I agreed with what you said with the policies a few minutes ago, but one of the issues that we're really identifying within the organizations that we're working with is they haven't even documented what their procedures are, what their processes, the practices that they do engage with. And so ultimately, that's a good starting point, is let's document what it is we're doing, and then we can build policy around that so that ultimately we can compare that with these frameworks to see where our gaps and our vulnerabilities truly lie. I think that would be a good starting place. And then ultimately, the change management issue that we're experiencing, with regard to how we're implementing upgrades, how we're tracking the mitigation of these gaps and vulnerabilities. We've got to be able to have an active tracking mechanism built into our practices so that we can see how change evolves within our organization. And then, of course, as we continue to mature as organizations, then we can start to target these CUI issues and really identify where our federal contract information sits, where our controlled unclassified information sits, and then be able to put more access controls around those specific sets of information and the assets that are associated with those information groups and things of that nature. I think that encompasses the biggest set of issues that we're seeing, but also represents a good starting point for cyber maturity and cyber hygiene within our organizations.
Good point.
So that's a good list for us to use if we're looking at our supply chain. So thank you for that.
Yeah, this is Lou Sally, if you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
I want to address, in my mind, it's a paradigm shift. A lot of the larger organizations have formal budgets for cybersecurity, security in general. We've been talking about the smaller organizations, and they're struggling with coming up with a line item, a formal line item in their budget to address these security concerns. It's just something, it's very it's been ingrained in us to have business interruption insurance, to have medical insurance, to have all these other, and I'll frame it in as insurance. For years and years and years, security's taken off, in the last 25 plus years. Tracy mentioned PCI compliance, and there's SOX and other more formal ones that have been in the background for years now. And I'm not downplaying that cybersecurity hasn't either, but all these smaller organizations are really struggling with the basics that we've been discussing. And I think that has to get addressed as well, so they understand it's no longer an option, right? So I just wanted to point out that I kind of see, for the smaller organizations at least, this paradigm that they've got to have funding to address these issues.
But Lou, I think it's also a perception, because we actually invest in a lot of family-owned businesses, up to about $20-30 million. And one of the things we're seeing that there are service providers that come with semi-deceptive way of cybersecurity. What I mean by that is, say, move your stuff to cloud, security is included. Or buy a firewall, security is included. Or buy my IT service, security is included. So if someone who is on a daily basis is not embedded in cybersecurity, like most of us on this call, they'll say, "Oh, okay, security included. Okay, cool. I'm good. I just spent $10 on the firewall, or $15 a month for the cloud. I have a security included."
Yeah, and that goes to lack of education, right?
Yes.
They just want to hand it off, and you take care of it. Yeah. I agree.
Hey, this is Chuck again. To that point that you just mentioned, Bartosz and Lou, I've always thought that there needs to be, how we have a UL certification on electronics in general. I think we need to have a similar certification for cybersecurity devices, or even for any device for that matter that hooks up to the networks, just because that makes it more onerous on the developers and the people that are putting these devices out, so that they all have some buy-in to make sure that they are trying to secure the United States as best possible whenever they attach anything to the network. Because we have to realize this is a community. It's not just my section of the network. And to Lou's point about having, for the smaller businesses, maybe we do create a company that has the ability to say, hey, if you hook this single device up to your network and it's your front door to the internet, then we, the company, will protect you to X level of potential loss or whatnot. And then that, I think, is where you get, if you make the device as a, not necessarily inexpensive, but a fair price, that gives that company a huge head start over any other security company. And at the same time, it gives all those smaller companies at least a sense of, and a knowing that they are protected to a certain level. And like I said, at the same time, then they become good net neighbors to everybody else, because like you pointed out, the educated and the more funded hackers will start from the bottom and work their way up. So we have to all be aware of that.
I think, no, this is a great point. And I think also another problem statement is that the lower you go into supply chain, or the smaller the business, people actually don't understand the value of their business in the context of cyber, which means what would have happened if I get breached and some IP know-how or whatever gets stolen, gets compromised, get injected. It's like, well, I have nothing to be stolen from. It's like, if I'm making some part, well, it's a part, okay? So educational element about the value of the business around cyber breach is also, I think, important element in this conversation. By the way, Richard put, I'm also monitoring the Q&A here on the board. Richard, you asked the question, how many small businesses have opted out of doing DoD contracting because the time, effort, money required to meet security rules is not affordable? And you said, are there any statistics of that? You know what, I can start, find out if there are any statistics if you want that answer.
Yeah, we've definitely seen some people say it's not worth it, or they can't afford it. or they don't want to address it. So I will just touch on quick cyber insurance. We had it, I'm a business owner, and we had insurance as part of our rider and everything, but we're starting to see some of the customers we work with are requiring certain cyber insurance requirements, and we have to send proof in. So if it's something you haven't looked at in a while, because we receive a lot of customer data and the work we do, so they want to know, how are you protecting our data, and then if there is a breach, how is it protected? So that might be a whole nother conference, but it opened up my eyes to a lot of different types of cyber insurance.
Tracy, we work with CHOP, with Marsh and others. Cyber insurance practices and the questionnaires that you have to fill out are a joke, in my personal opinion. The way they ask you questions, it doesn't even invoke the element of truly cyber protection. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, they're protecting you against certain incidents. If someone wires money out because they were socially, farmed or whatever, then, does the insurance cover you or not? But what my point is, I'm starting to see it from some of our customers, the requirement.
Yeah.
And, you need to meet certain expectations to do business with us. Does anybody else have any, how do we fix this? How do we get ahead? Any closing thoughts?
I think Gabriel.
Hey, Tracy. Hi, good morning. It's Gabriel Diaz, Chief Information Security Officer for G2 Up. So I'd like to thank Dan for putting this together, Tracy, Bartos for your inputs and presentation. So before I jump into my original comment, I want to kind of back up Tracy on this. It's not just a requirement for future businesses to obtain insurance and be covered, but it really is, it does provide a sense of financial security in the case of an incident. It doesn't place the entire burden on the business itself. So there is that value added for, maybe a relatively small cost relative to the incident itself. So there is that to say for insurance itself. You're right. It doesn't cover every single incident. It's not even written maybe in the language of how to protect or respond to an incident itself, but provides that financial blanket so that it doesn't really weigh down the business with a particular incident, no matter what the impact of the incident might be financially. So is that to...
Yeah, Gabriel, with the people businesses we deal, which is much bigger, 99% post-incident insurance doesn't pay out because they will always find in your processes, in your framework, in your control, something that will disqualify you from being paid.
So then that brings me to my original point before I wanted to talk about the insurance was the onus is really on us. We are the cybersecurity community. We are the cybersecurity experts. I like the gentleman that mentioned that we should set up maybe a coalition to inform and maybe help, maybe government regulate some of this to a certain degree, or maybe us as a community take that step to really solidify and standardize some form of cybersecurity coalition, somewhere where us as the professionals are also the educators and inform folks of this, because 95% of people don't really know about what's going on with cyber. They probably don't even care. So it's on us to be that community of trainers. It's us as the professional cybersecurity engineers or business developers. We need to really take that on us proactively and get ahead of this to help them all out as a society. It's a systemic problem. It comes back down to an issue of, and I see this kind of as a common denominator, no matter what business I've been in with. It comes down to culture, really. It's a culture mindset that needs to be, flipped like a switch. We need to start seeing cybersecurity more and more. And I'm very, very happy G2 does this. This is one of the things I'm very proud of working with G2 at, is we do this proactively. We see this as part of a business essential type of avenue for doing business. We see cybersecurity on the forefront. Other companies should do the same. It's a culture change, sometimes a culture shock for some business owners, operations managers, things of that nature. But I think it starts with that. And it piggybacks on what you were referring to, that you have lots of customers that don't seem to understand the value of their businesses. So it's up to us to help them recognize that value. So that's kind of where I'm going at. It comes down to culture, not just for our vendors, suppliers, but also all our employees within our companies. A lot of training, a lot of finding the value in what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and how cybersecurity as an investment up front proves in the long run to be something that will ultimately protect your business, from all sorts of financial disasters in the future. So that's kind of my 2 cents in the matter. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're at the top of the hour, Tracy. Isn't it 1 o'clock? Tracy, you can put the closing remarks with Dan. I talk too much.
No, you never do. I think one thing I got out of this, where we might be a little weak, is our incident response time. Like you said, sometimes we get so wrapped up in the compliance requirements or the contractual requirements or things I even have to send in. We get inspected. Are we doing it the way we're supposed to? But we have to be able to respond quickly and isolate. So that's one thing I got out of this. So I hope everyone, we got you thinking a little bit. So we look forward to, meeting again soon. And Dan, did you want us to turn back over to you?
Sure, just for a moment.
Okay.
Tracy.
Here's Dan.
Tracy and Bartos, thank you very much. Wonderful program. Great questions from the participants. So thank you to everyone for your energy on that. I'm sure that we'll have to, as people have pointed out, have some more discussion about this in the future. So don't be shocked when I come back to talk to you some more about continuing the dialogue. But I want to thank everybody for their attendance. Next week, or rather next month, we will have a new program, which is Open Seas Technology Innovation Hub, which should be very, very interesting about some of the ocean engineering activities that are happening out there. So on behalf of Hampton Roads Innovation Collaborative, thank you again, one and all, and I'll send out the recorded video to everyone. Thank you again.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Mm-hmm.